Well, hi. Sorry for that long, awkwardness. Um, I went live and then I didn't go live and then I went live and then I stopped going live and it was just a mess. So, I apologize for that, guys. I I had to talk to my school faculty. First day of school is today. I'm trying to work on this huge project straight out of the gate. So, it was rough, and I don't know what I'm gonna do for my project yet. And I was talking to my faculty and trying to figure out what to do, and it's just a nightmare. It's been a rough day. So, um, yeah. So hi, Tori. Thank you guys for being here. Need a break, so that's why I'm here right now. Oh man, gosh, it's been a long day. Just trying to get my ducks in a row and figure out what to do, and it's been rough. Hi, Riddy. Um, yeah. Yeah, it's okay. It's been so busy, and I don't know, I still don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm still just don't know what I'm gonna do about that. Still trying to figure it out. I gotta try and find time between now and Friday to call some schools and ask them questions, and don't know what I'm gonna do with it, so I'm just a little stressed out. But anyways, you didn't come to hear me talk about my problems. You came to hear me talk about this book. So, we are starting book 4 of the... Wow, that was weird. Huh. We are starting book 4 of the Enola Holmes mystery series. So this is... I hate that there's a glare on it. It's because this library covering, you know. We're starting book 4, which it's up there. So, book 4 is The Case of the Peculiar Pink Fan. So, thanks, Riddy. It's okay, you can calculate. Calculate really well. Get all the numbers right. So, this is The Case of the Peculiar Pink Fan. This book is brought to you by Westport Public Library in Westport, Connecticut. So, thank you, Westport. Woo! Yay, Westport! So, we are going to get started. I thought about reading you guys the inside chapter. I realized I didn't, or sorry, inside jacket. I realized I didn't read you that at the end of my last book, but I feel like we should just jump in. But you will meet a re-meet. It's not even a word. But we will be reintroduced to a character you have already met once before. There are 6 books in the series total. So we have The Case of the Peculiar Pink Fan, The Case of the Cryptic... it's blocked, I can't read the end of that. And then The Case of the Gypsy Goodbye. Cryptic, I think it's crinoline. Crinoline? It's a British, it's an old-timey word. Hold on. Crinoline. Crinoline. Whatever it is. I know it's an article of clothing that nobody wears anymore, so. Alrighty. And then we have The Case of the Gypsy Goodbye, the last book in the series. Which I believe it is the actual last book. I don't think Nancy Springer is writing these books anymore. I think she's rounded out the series and finished it off. So, as far as I know, there are only 6 in the series. So, without further ado, we'll get started. This is the introduction. So, May 1889. Oh, yes. That's exactly, yes. Like what women used to wear under their skirt to make it poofy. Crinoline? I don't know how you pronounce. I did not take phonics growing up. I learned to read just by, putting my finger on the word and sounding them out. So I'm probably the least equipped person to be reading you any book whatsoever, especially these books full of SAT words. So, I apologize for my terrible pronunciation. Pronunciation is just bad. Alright, anyways. May 1889. It has now been more than 8 months since the girl went missing. The girl has a name, my dear Mycroft, interrupts Sherlock, with only a slight edge in his voice, mindful that he is his brother's dinner guest. Mycroft, an excellent host despite his reclusive ways, has waited until the wood pigeon pie with currant sauce has been dispatched before addressing the unpleasant problem of their youthful sister, Enola Holmes. Enola, nor, alas, did she go missing in any usual sense of the term, adds Sherlock in a quieter, almost whimsical tones. She rebelled, she bolted, and she has actively eluded us. But that's not all she has actively done. Grunting as his frontal amplitude gets in the way, Mycroft leans forward and reaches for the cut-glass decanter. Aware that Mycroft has something of essence to say, Sherlock waits silently while his older brother refills their glasses with the excellent beverage that is making this conversation palatable. Both men have loosened their high-starched collars and black ties. Mycroft sips his drink before he continues, speaking in his usual ponderous and irritating way. During that 8-month period of time, she has been instrumental in rescuing 3 missing persons and in bringing 3 dangerous criminals to justice. I had noticed, Sherlock acknowledges. What of it? Do you not detect a most alarming pattern in her activities? Not at all. Sheerest happenstance. The case of the Marquess of Basilweather she stumbled across, Lady Cecily Alistair she found while administering charity upon the streets in her guise as a nun, and she just happened to be able to identify the kidnapper? Sherlock stares down Mycroft's acid comment. And as I was going to say, concerning Watson's disappearance, if he were not so publicly linked with me, would she have become involved? You do not know how or why she became involved. You still do not know how she found him. No, admits Sherlock Holmes, I do not. Partially due to the mellowing influence of his brother's well-aged port wine, and partially due to the passing of time and certain events that have occurred, thoughts of his runaway sister no longer cause him sharp chagrin and even more keen anxiety. And it is not the first time she has outwitted us, he says, almost with pride. Bah! What good will such tricks and temerity do to her when she becomes a woman? Little enough, I suppose. She is a true daughter of our suffragist mother, but at least for the moment I no longer fear for her safety. Evidently she is quite able to take care of herself. Mycroft gestures as if brushing away an irritating insect. That is not the point. It is the girl's future that is at stake, not her immediate survival. What is to become of her in a few years? No gentleman of any means will wed such an independent young woman who interests herself in criminal activities. She is only 14, Mycroft, Sherlock points out patiently. When she reaches courting age, I doubt she will any longer carry a dagger in her bosom. Mycroft arches his thorny eyebrows. You think she will eventually conform to society's expectations? You who refuse to take a degree in any recognized field, instead inventing your own calling and livelihood? The world's first and only private consulting detective gestures dismissively. She is female, my dear Mycroft. The biological imperatives of her sex urge her to nest and procreate. The first stirrings of womanly maturity will impel her. Bah! Balderdash! Mycroft can no longer restrain his asperity. You really think our renegade sister will settle down to find herself a husband? Why, what do you think she will do? Retorts Sherlock, a bit stung. The great detective is unaccustomed to the word balderdash as applied to his pronouncements. Perhaps she intends to make a lifelong career in finding missing persons and apprehending evildoers. It is possible. What, you believe she might set herself up in business, as my competition? Sherlock's annoyance gives way to amusement. He begins to chuckle. Mycroft says quietly, I would not put it beyond her. You'll have her smoking cigars next. Sherlock Holmes laughs heartily now. Have you forgotten our sister is just a wayward child? She cannot possibly possess such fixity of purpose. Preposterous, my dear Mycroft. Utterly preposterous. It's the end of the introduction. Yeah, I'm not good with the phonics. Alrighty. We're going to just press on. Chapter the 1st. So far my only client, says Dr. Ragiston, scientific Predatorian, had been a stout elderly widow anxious to find her lost lapdog, a frightened lady who could not locate a valuable heart-shaped ruby which had been given to her by her husband, and an army general whose most cherished souvenir of the Crimean War had disappeared, namely his bullet-riddled leg bone signed by the field doctor who had amputated it. Trifles all. My energies should have been directed towards a far more important objective, to find Mum. I knew my mother was roaming with the gypsies, and I had promised myself that in the spring I would track her down, not to reproach her or coerce her, only to reunite with my amputated family member, so to speak. Yet here it was May already. I had made no effort at all to search for Mum, and I did not know why except to say that business detained me in London. Business? A lapdog, a lapidary, and a leg bone? But clients were clients, I told myself. It had not, of course, been necessary or possible for any of them to meet the illustrious and fictitious Dr. Ragiston himself. Rather, Miss Ivy Michelle, his trusted assistant, had returned the widow's pet, an adorable curly-haired spaniel, to its grateful owner, having taken it back from a notorious Whitechapel dealer in purloined purebred dogs. Similarly, Miss Michelle had resolved the affair of the lost jewel simply by sending a boy up the linden tree outside the lady's window to look at a magpie's nest. How easily I could have climbed that tree myself, and how I yearned to do so, but propriety forbade. As for the General's leg in a box, I was rather tepidly on the trail of it when I chanced to become involved in a far more intriguing and, as it turned out, urgent case. I blush to confess that the initial encounter took place within a recent establishment on Oxford Street, which, while gratefully patronized by women who shopped that expensive district, was not mentioned in mixed society. The first London ladies' lavatory. This splendid innovation, tacitly acknowledging that well-bred women no longer spent their days at home within a few steps of their own water closets, cost a penny to enter, quite worth it, when one needed it, even though the same sum would have given an East End child bread, milk, and grammar schooling for a day. The cost ensured that the facility was used mostly by females of the upper class, although the occasional working girl, such as Ivy Michelle in her false curls and cheaply fashionable ready-made clothing, might venture in. That day, however, I was not disguised as a slightly vulgar Ivy Michelle. Instead, my inquiries having taken me to the neighborhood of the British Museum, which both of my brothers frequented, to my discomfiture, I was got up as a female scholar, with my unlovely hair in a plain bun, and my narrow, sallow face disguised by ebony-rimmed spectacles. These, while minimizing my alarming nose, also made me an object rather beneath notice, as no fashionable lady would ever wear glasses. In a dress of good quality, yet narrow, dark, and untrimmed serge, and a similarly plain dark hat, I sat in the ladies' lavatory's comfortably dark brown leather and faux marble parlor to relax a few moments in grateful certainty that neither Sherlock nor Mycroft was likely to come in there after me. It had been a fraught day so far. Female scholars are not much admired among the male populace of London, but here I attracted no attention. It was quite customary for a patron weary of shopping to rest in the parlor's shadowy plasterwork coolness before venturing again into the dust and heat of the street. A bell tinkled. The maidservant crossed the lavatory parlor to open the door, and 3 ladies came in. They passed close by me, for I occupied a plush russet settee beside the door. I did not, of course, look up from my newspaper, nor would I have given them any thought, if it were not that, from the moment they entered, I sensed something amiss, badly so. A tension amongst them. I heard silk petticoats rustling as they passed, but no other sound. They were not speaking to one another. Wondering what might be the matter, without moving my head, it would have been bad manners to peer openly, I raised my eyes, although I could tell little enough from my view of their backs. 2 richly dressed matrons, their voluminous skirts trailing, flanked a younger, slimmer female in the very latest Paris fashion. Indeed, it was the first time I had seen a belle skirt on an actual person, rather than a department store mannequin. Huge citrine bows poofed and trailed by way of bustle or train, but the skirt itself, of a deeper yellow-green, was drawn in by hidden tapes as if to simulate a second waist in the neighborhood of the knees. Beneath this, it spread out again to form a flounced bell, from under which the girl's feet never peeped. Indeed, they hardly stirred her ruffles when she walked, for her skirt limited her stride to perhaps 10 inches. I winced, watching her falter along, for although her slender form did not attain the ideal hourglass figure, to my eye she was a lovely creature. It was as if someone had put a deer in hobbles. Good sense had always sacrificed itself for fashion, of course, hoop skirts, bustles, but for this girl I thought must utterly be fashion's fool, wearing a dress in which she could barely toddle. As the trio neared the doorway to the lavatory's inner sanctum, the girl halted. "Come along, child," commanded one of the older women. Instead, without a word, the bell-skirted girl seated herself less than gracefully. Indeed, she threw herself, almost falling, onto one of the dark leather armchairs across the room from me. and as her face turned towards me, I very nearly gasped aloud with shock and surprise, for I knew her. I could not be mistaken, for our adventures, the sisterhood I had felt for her, my terror when the garroter had attacked her, all remained indelibly in my memory. The sight of her sensitive, cultured face magnetized me. It was the baronet's daughter, the left-handed lady whom I had once found and rescued. It was the Honorable Cecily Alistair. But I did not recognize the women with her. Where was Cecily's mother, the lovely Lady Theodora? As for Lady Cecily, this past winter I had seen her cold, hungry, and dressed in rags, with all the luster gone out of her brilliant eyes, but nothing could have prepared me for the alarm I felt at her appearance now. Her face seemed even more haggard than when I had seen her last, and its expression more distressed. With her jaw clenched and her full lips thinned in defiance, with a glare of wild, desperate rebellion, she faced the two matrons towering over her. "No, indeed, young lady," said one of these in authoritative tones that declared her to be far more than a chaperone. "Grandmamma, perhaps? Or auntie? You are coming with us." She grabbed the seated girl by one elbow, and the second woman seized the other. By now I had raised my head, frankly gawking. Luckily the two dowagers faced away from me, their attention all on the 16-year-old girl in the armchair. In a low voice Lady Cecily replied, "You cannot make me," and she slumped deep in the chair, quite smashing her citrine ornaments, letting herself sag with her head down, so that if the two women wanted her to stand, they must haul her bodily to her feet. This would have been no small struggle, yet I think they would have done so if it were not for my presence. They glanced around to see who might be watching. Hastily I looked down again at my newspaper, but they were not stupid. "Well," I heard one of them say in brittle tones, "I suppose we must go by turns." "Proceed," responded the other. "I will stay with her." One of them went into the lavatory proper, and hearing its door swing shut, I glanced up again. The second matron was seating herself upon another armchair, her attention for the moment fixed on the arrangement of her pongy draperies, and in that instant Lady Cecily lifted her head, and like a prisoner mindful of any possible means of escape, looked straight at me. And recognized me. Even though we had met only once, the night her kidnapper had nearly killed her, she knew me. Snap! It was as if a whip had cracked, such was the force with which our gazes met, and the speed, for instantly she looked down again, doubtless to hide from her companion the widening of her eyes. Doing likewise, I wonder whether she remembered my name, which I had so impulsively and unwisely divulged to her. Enola Holmes. I felt sisterhood towards this unhappy genius, a baronet's daughter of dual personality, the left-handed artist who felt the plight of the poor and rendered it in the most extraordinary charcoal drawings, yet who was forced to be the docile right-handed Lady Cecily for society. But I knew much more of her than she did of me. I could only imagine how much like a dream I, a mystery girl in a black cloak, must have seemed on that perilous night, and her incredulity at seeing me again, now, in daylight, and perhaps her hope that I might once again assist her, whatever her plight might be. What might be the matter? Laying my newspaper aside as if I were tired of it, I considered the desperation I had seen in Lady Cecily's dark eyes, the pallor of her gaunt face, the dullness of her golden brown hair pulled straight back from her forehead beneath a simple hat, a flat straw boater. When, a moment later, I ventured to look up again, she held a fan. A most peculiar fan, for it was uniformly candy pink, dreadfully common, and quite mismatched to her lemon ribbons, lime skirt, and creamy kid leather gloves and boots. Also, while her expensive new skirt was of the finest butter-soft yellow-green Syrah, her fan was made of merest folded paper, glued to plain sticks and edged with ordinary pink-tinted feathers. Her dowager escort, seated close to her, and at an angle to watch her, said peevishly, "I am sure that I will never understand why you insist on dragging that awful thing around when you have that nice fan I gave you. Cream silk pan with carved ivory sticks and point lace overlay. Have you forgotten?" Ignoring her, Cecily opened the pink fan and began to ply it as if to cool her face. I noticed that she used her left hand. Significant. She chose to be her true self rather than obeying the demands of propriety. I noticed also that she positioned the fan as a frail sort of barrier between herself and her guardian. Behind its brief concealment her gaze caught mine, and in that moment the fan, almost as if by accident, tapped her on the forehead. I understood her signal at once. Caution, we are being watched. The language of fans had been invented by young lovers attempting to court in the presence of chaperones, and while certainly I had never enjoyed a lover, nor did I expect I ever would, in my innocent child days at Ferndale Hall, and under the wry tutelage of my mother, I had often been diverted by watching. Giving no other sign, I sighed, as if hot and weary, reached into the large pocket centered under the frontal drapery of my dress and pulled out my own fan, which I carried not for the sake of elegance or flirtation, but simply to cool my face. My fan was brown cambric, plain but tasteful, and I opened it far enough, more than halfway, to indicate friendship. Meanwhile, the dowager who had gone into the lavatory emerged, and the other one rose to take her turn. Lady Cecily seized this moment, when their attention was distracted, to send her fan into a frenzied fluttering, clearly a signal of agitation and distress. I let my fan rest for a moment upon my right cheek. Yes, telling her that I understood, something was wrong. "Use your right hand," snapped the dowager, who was now seating herself, "and put that silly toy away." Although she froze motionless, Cecily did not obey. "Put it away, I said," ordered her captor. Ordered her captor? Such seemed to be the role of the dowager. Lady Cecily said, "No, it amuses me." "No?" The larger, older woman's tone became dangerous, but then shifted. "Oh, very well, defy me, but only in this." Lowering rather than raising her voice, she spoke on grimly, yet so quietly that I could not hear. Stiffly seated, her stout waist corseted to the utmost within her elaborate gown, the dowager kept her profile to me, and whilst outwardly I sat sedately fanning myself, inwardly my every sense had alerted like a hunting dog on point. Studying the woman before me so as to recognize her should I see her again, I realized it would be difficult to tell her from the other one. Both had features oddly dainty amidst the breadth and fleshiness of their faces. Arched, brittle brows, puppy noses, thin lips. Indeed, both looked so much alike that quite probably they were sisters, perhaps even twins. This one's hair might be graying a bit more than the other's, what I could see of it beneath a magnificent hat so tilted it convoluted that dog-tooth lilies clustered beneath its brim. "If it takes all day," her voice rose slightly as vehemence took hold, "a trousseau you will need, and a trousseau you will have." Lady Cecily said, "You cannot make me wear it." "We shall see. Come along," she said as the other matron emerged from the lavatory, signaling her readiness by lifting her parasol. Without a word, Cecily stood up, but as she did so she held her fan open in front of her face. Meant to encourage a timid lover, the fan so displayed signaled, "Approach me." But under the circumstances, with her great dark eyes flashing a plea to me over its pink-feathered edge, the fan signaled, "What?" "Do not forsake me. Help me." Willingly, I thought, as I tapped my cheek. Yes, but how? Rescue me. From what? Do put that wretched toy in your pocket. Cecily only lowered her pink fan to her side as the two dowagers flanked her again and accompanied her towards the door beside which I sat, with my fan languidly waving but my mind racing. Cecily held her fan by its string now, twirling it, another signal of danger. "Be careful, we are being watched." She wished for secrecy, then, so I acted abstracted, gazing at an ugly gilt-framed still life on the far wall as they passed me, but all the time planning to follow them, find out where they... Thump! An impact rocked the settee in which I sat, and peripherally I saw a blur of citrine, Lady Cecily, who had tripped over her ridiculous bell skirt, nearly falling into me. Instantly her two scowling escorts scooped her up and hurried her out, all without a word of apology to me. Had they spared me even a glance, they might have seen as I did. On the settee next to me lay the pink paper fan. That's the end of the first chapter. Oh, am I reading too fast? I'm sorry. Please slow me down if I'm reading too fast. Well, hello! Susan, it's so good to see you! So good to see you. Glad to have you. Toilets do always need spinking up. I mean, we use them every day. Hi, Salad! Welcome. Welcome, welcome. So please, if I'm reading way too fast for you to understand what I'm saying, please stop me because oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, my mom told me that she walked by my door a while ago and said that I was reading way too fast. So Yeah, she was like, you're reading so fast I can't understand what you're saying. And I was like, well, that sucks, because the whole point is I want people to understand what I'm saying, because I'm reading to them. So, thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Alrighty. I'm going to keep on going. I feel like I got something in my eye. But I'm going to keep on keeping on. So, I might go for another hour. Maybe less, just because I got a long day tomorrow. But I'm going to try and get through a couple more chapters at least. So maybe another hour, depends on how, much energy I'm got left in me. You are a genius. Yes, we've established that. So it's not a surprise. Oh, I'm sorry. The book is called The Case of the Peculiar Pink Fan. It is the 4th book in the Enola Holmes mystery series, who is the fictitious, obviously fictitious, but she's the sister of Sherlock Holmes in this series. Arthur Conan Doyle did not give Sherlock Holmes a sister, but Nancy Springer, the author of these books, did. Thank you. You probably don't even need me to say that. Sorry. So this is the 4th book in the series, and that was the first chapter of the 4th book. So, now, we are moving on. Oh, I'm glad you like the series. It's a good one. It's one of my favorites. And I haven't read it since I was probably in, I don't know, 6th grade, 8th grade, something like that. So, I am enjoying it. When was this book published? Hold on. I could probably tell you how old I was when I read this book. But I'm not going to. This book was published in 2008, so this is 10 years old. Chapter the 2nd. The instant the door closed behind Cecily and her 2 redoubtable chaperones, I sprang to my feet, slipping her pink fan along with my own into my pocket. I had to follow her and find out what was the matter in order to help her, but if I trailed her party too closely, I risked being noticed by her formidable chaperones. Therefore, I first jumped upon the settee, where by standing on tiptoe I could just see through the lavatory's high window. The deep-set, diamond-shaped window panes distorted my limited view, but I could make out the threesome progressing towards the cab stand. Climbing down, I found the maidservant watching me with her mouth open. Laying a finger to my lips, I handed her a shilling, buying her silence. This transaction delayed me only slightly, yet seemed to take forever. In great haste, I pulled on my gloves and exited the lavatory. To my relief, I was just in time to see a slight figure in a bell skirt being helped into a four-wheeler, along with her 2 guardians. Taking note mentally of their cab's number, I strode forward to secure one of my own, but never got so far. In that careless, unfortunate moment, I found myself face to face with my brother. The older, stouter one, Mycroft. We all but bumped into each other, and were, I think, both equally startled. I believe I screamed. I know he let forth with a sort of hoot, as if someone had given him a hard blow to his stamped velvet waistcoat. As everything happened at once, it is hard to recall who moved first, whether he seized me by the elbow before or after I kicked him briskly in the shin, but I know I twisted like an eel in his grip. I seem to recall stamping hard on the well-polished toe of his thin leather boot, and without resorting to my dagger, I broke away and ran. Had he been Sherlock, very likely freedom would have been all over for me, but it was not that hard to run from Mycroft. I heard him puff after me only a few steps before he bellowed to all and sundry, "Stop that girl!" Simultaneously I shrieked, "That man laid hands upon me!" An accusation so shocking that bystanders gasped with outrage and turned upon Mycroft with shouts and stares. Meanwhile, dodging between skirts and ducking beneath gentlemanly elbows, I took refuge once more in the ladies' lavatory, whisking past the doorkeeper with the gabled tale of having forgotten something. Gabbled, it's 2 B's, gabbled tale of having forgotten something. Hurrying straight into that excellent facilities in her sanctum, I found the maidservant at work with her perfume atomizer, attempting to quell the inevitable stench. "Vanish," I snapped at her, and without a murmur she retreated to the parlor. By the time Mycroft had, I surmise, explained himself and summoned a constable, I was gone through the back window, and I was no longer a female scholar. Minus hat, gloves, and glasses, I no longer resembled that drab creature at all, thanks to a colorful length of Indian print cotton. I always carry such useful things in my bust for emergencies, and also to lend me the appearance of the bosom I did not possess. Thus, looking quite the bohemian, with my bare hands, my head wrapped like that of a heathen, and my shawl trailing halfway to the ground, I walked to the underground and made my way safely back to Dr. Ragiston's office. None of the servants saw me come in, for I did not, in my outlandish costume, enter by the front door. Rather, I pressed the center of a certain scroll amid the wood ornamentation that dripped like... I pressed the center of a certain scroll amid the wood ornamentation that dripped like cake sugar all over the house's gingerbread brown stone facade, then slipped around the side, opened the secret door, and strode directly into the locked inner room, Dr. Ragiston's private office. It was my very good fortune that this sanctum had been fitted out for use by a medium, a villain, but that is another story, who had once held seances there, hence the secret door behind a bookshelf to the outside, and also a small secret chamber where I kept my various disguises. I threw my bohemian shawl aside, turned up the gas lamps for light, then lounged upon the chintz sofa, frowning. Angry at myself. Had I been alert and taking proper precautions looking about me, the encounter with Mycroft would have never happened. Now, in addition to embarrassing myself, I was not yet ready to rejoice in the way I had embarrassed him. I had lost my chance to shadow Lady Cecily and find out what mysterious new misfortune might beset her. Even the number of the cab she had taken was lost from my mind, which apparently had dropped it during the fracas. I was left with no clue except for the peculiar fan lying in my lap. Indeed, if it were not for that candy-pink artifact, I would have found it difficult to believe what had happened. Holding the fan up to the light, I scanned it. Then, pulling a magnifying lens from my bosom, I studied it inch by inch. I hoped to find a note or message, but discovered only plain sticks, their cheap soft wood unmarred by any scratched or penciled lines, and plain pink paper, slightly watermarked in a decorative checkerboard motif, but quite virginal. As was the fan's edging of downy feathers, no doubt plucked from some common backyard duck before being dyed pink. I could see no marks on the shafts of the feathers, nothing slipped between the sticks of paper, no hidden compartment, simply nothing of interest. Confound it all. If only... Drat Mycroft. Drat and blast brothers. Grumpily I moved to Dr. Ragiston's vast mahogany desk, where with pencil and drawing paper I sketched quite an alarming picture of Mycroft at the moment he had recognized me. His bushy brows all shot up as if he had just trod upon a rat. Then, my feelings somewhat relieved, more contemplatively, I drew a likeness of Lady Cecily in her bell skirt. Often when I find myself in doubt, upset, or perplexity, I turn to sketching, and I generally find that it does good somehow. In no way is Lady Cecily a fool for fashion. Why ever should she wear a bell skirt? Doodling, I remembered the flat boater I had seen on her head. Why such a frightfully modish costume, yet a hat not the least bit fashionable? Next I started sketching her face, first in profile, then from the front. The style in which she wore her hair, pulled straight back, was not fashionable either. If she cared about fashion, she would have worn a fringe to cover that high forehead. Why, she looks a bit like Alice in Wonderland. Despite Sir John Tenniel's marvelous illustrations, I had never much enjoyed Lewis Carroll's books. Alice never smiled. I did not like nonsense stories. I wanted narrative to unfold with some degree of logic, much as life should, although often it did not. For instance, it made no sense that a well-to-do girl as Lady Cecily should carry a paper fan. Why such a silly pink thing? Well and truly engrossed in my drawing now, I sketched Cecily again, this time putting the fan in her hand, trying to encapture the way she had looked at me. With a shudder, as if a whip had snapped too far close to me, I felt again the desperation of her gaze. Something is dreadfully wrong. Even though I did not at all understand what she wanted of me, I knew I must try to help her. But how to find out what was the matter? After a few moments' thought, I got up and strode to a certain bookcase where I reached behind the stout volume of Pope's Essays and touched a hidden latch. Quite silently the shelf turned upon its well-oiled hinges, allowing me to pass into my very private dressing-room, where I began to effect necessary changes to my costume and appearance. Therefore I decided to go calling upon the Allistairs. Therefore, because Lady Theodora knew me only as the mousy Mrs. Ragiston, I must once again become that humble person. Timid, fumbling, and dowdy, even though she carried a lorgnette. Spell it for you guys. A lorgnette and a parasol, Dr. Ragiston's child bride, remembering to tap softly, plied the brass knocker upon the formidable front door of the baronet's townhouse. I had achieved the dowdiness by combining grey cotton gloves and quite a limp olive-green felt hat with an expensive but hideous brown print dress. Moreover, I had tucked moss roses, an old-fashioned blossom, into my hatband and my bosom. Upper-class bosoms are expected to serve as flower-pots. I hoped Lady Theodora would see me from my previous visits and know that she, a radiantly beautiful woman, found Mrs. Ragiston, who was quite the opposite, soothing to her nerves. But when the redoubtable butler answered the door, he bore no silver tray, nor did he so much as glance at the calling card in my gloved hand, although I am sure he recognized me. Lady Theodora is receiving no visitors? Her ladyship is unwell? I ventured, remembering to keep my tone that of a well-bred sparrow. Her ladyship is seeing no one. If it were an ordinary matter of indisposition, he would have agreed that her ladyship was unwell. Tomorrow, perhaps? I chirped. Most unlikely. Her ladyship remains in total seclusion. Another baby on the way, perhaps? As if poor Theodora had not been born enough little Alistairs already? She must be of age to cease. Was this mysterious seclusion mere coincidence, or did it have something to do with Lady Theodora's most problematic daughter? Displaying distress or vacuity of mind, I began to twitter. How very disappointing, since I am here. I have just been wanting to meet... Might I just have a word with Lady Cecily? The Honourable Lady Cecily no longer resides here. This surprised me for two reasons. Where was Cecily, if not here, at her home, and why had the butler been so frank? I saw by his sour expression that already he regretted his indiscretion. Evidently my persistent brown presence was wearing him down. Encouraged, I did not budge from the doorstep. Really? Lady Cecily has gone already to the country, perhaps? But I was to get nothing more out of him. Excusing himself, he shut the door in my face. So much for talking with Lady Theodora. Now what? It's the end of the second chapter. Oh yes, no spoilers, Susan. No spoilers. Alrighty. So, alrighty. I think I'm going to go till about 9 o'clock EST. So, about another 45-ish minutes. Yes, I did know that, Susan. That is why I'm reading this series, because they are going to make a movie. It's in pre-production right now. So now, hopefully, by the time the film is out, all of these books will have been read by me, and you can watch them, and then after everybody sees the movie, you can come watch these videos too, and compare the two. So, yep. So I'm pretty excited about it, and I believe Millie Bobby Brown is slated to play, starring Millie Bobby Brown. She's going to be playing Enola, so I think it's going to be very, very good. Oh, look what I just found on the back of this book. I just have to show you. Do you guys remember these in library books? Apparently this was the last due date. And then they all switched to little barcodes, and now they just scan your books and tell you when they're due. But I remember getting them stamped in the little small libraries. Yep. Alright. I feel like my nose is dripping, but you can't see it, so that's okay. Whoa. Something just opened up on my computer. Go away. Alrighty. Chapter the 3rd. That evening, in my customary guise as Dr. Ragiston's secretary, Ivy Michelle, I went home to my rented lodging and shared a less than satisfactory supper of carrots and kidneys with my elderly landlady. Since Mrs. Tupper is as deaf as a cast-iron gatepost, I attempted no conversation while we ate. But afterwards, I signaled her that I wished to borrow some reading material from her. That is to say, I spread my hands as if opening a newspaper, then pointed upward towards her bedchamber. There were only 3 rooms on her East End hovel, mine, hers, and the single cooking/dining/sitting room on the ground floor. Still the sweet old soul did not understand. Placing her trumpet to her ear, she leaned towards me over a table and bellowed, "What? You say there's a bat got in upstairs?" Eventually I had to lead her upstairs to show her what I wanted, her stacks of society periodicals. As a step towards finding and helping Lady Cecily, I hoped to discover the identity of the ogresses in whose dubious company I had seen her. Society watching was a pursuit that, being a person of domestic convictions, I had scorned up until now. So I had a great deal of catching up to do. After carrying Mrs. Tupper's accumulated periodicals to my own room, gladly I rid myself not only of my dress, but my bust enhancer, hip regulators and corset, my cheek and nostril inserts, my fringe of curls, and my false eyelashes, making myself comfortable in a dressing gown and slippers before settling down to read. Although I cannot say I particularly enjoyed it, over the course of the next several hours I learned that croquet was quite passé, tennis and archery still in mode, but the very latest sport for ladies was golf. Lord Jug-Ears and Lady Parsnip-Face had been seen coaching in Hyde Park. She wore a Worth gown of seal blue, French gibberish more. What a shame that Kensington Palace stood empty despite its restoration. A most distinguished gathering had attended the christening of baby so-and-so, firstborn of Lord such-and-such, Earl of what does it matter. Satin was out, Pot de Soie in. An oil painting exhibition themed around the progress of the British Empire was viewable at gallery ever so exclusive. Viscount and Viscountess, ancient lineage, announced the engagement of their daughter long named to great prospects, the younger son of Earl Blueblood. My head ached abominably. I thought I should go quite mad, and had I not yet looked through an even quarter of... Oh, jeez Louise. I thought I should go quite mad, and I had not yet looked through even a quarter of the stack. I peered at photographs of Duchess Duckfoot's boating party, Baron Baldnose's cricket team's annual banquet, debutantes' wasp waists coming out ball, and dozens more without finding either of the two unpleasant faces I sought. When day turned to dark, gladly I rose from my chair, for I would strain my eyes if I attempted to read any longer by candlelight. From its hiding place between mattress and bedstead, I pulled the dark, decrepit clothing I wore when I went out to wander the night. Now that winter had passed, poor folk living in the streets were less in need of my help, and since my brother Sherlock knew of my work as the Sister of Charity, I had been obliged to discard my black habit with deep pockets. While I still managed to slip pennies to the unfortunate, I had found another guise in which to roam London in the dark hours. I went as a midden picker, that is, one who scavenges garbage heaps for bits of rag for the paper mills, bone for garden meal, metal for the smelters, or food, definitely not for me. I wore a shabby skirt and shawl, walked with a rickety, shambling gait, and carried a battered lantern in one hand and a burlap sack upon my bent back. Some innate unrest drives me to roam the night in any event, but in settling upon this particular guise I gave myself a purpose. I wanted to learn my way around all of London, not just the East End. As a midden picker I could go anywhere without interference, for I exemplified thriftiness. Although propriety dictated that such an unsightly scavenger must steal in and out again by night, still, only the most mean and stingy of households would drive such a hard-working representative of the deserving poor from their premises. Whether Mrs. Tupper was asleep yet or not, there was no fear that the dear deaf soul would hear me go out. Latching the door behind me, I made my way into the crowded street in the warm months, the narrow lanes of the slums thronged even at midnight. Arm in arm, a clot of men staggering past singing a drunken song. On one corner, by the light of a street lamp, haggard women sewed sacks for flour and such, piecework to bring in a few farthings until their hands and eyes could labor no more. On another corner loitered other women, showing a great deal of bosom and ankle, also at work but not sewing. Everywhere children meandered aimlessly. It sometimes seemed to me that half the population of London was children and half the children were orphans. It was very much the usual thing for a girl of the slums to have a baby by the time she was 15, then die in her 20s, whilst the other half were Hansels and Gretels turned out by parents who could not feed them. This was East End London. 10 minutes on the Underground took me to West London, which might as well have been a different world, especially in the neighborhood where I went that night. Here, square old houses slept, blanketed in ivy, surrounded by square fenced yards. Here, streets ran wide and empty, into yet more squares, cobbled squares. This area was like a great square patch brick and stone quilt. I had not yet comprehended to my satisfaction. What sort of people lived here? In a square-towered Italianate villa, nouveau riche or impoverished royalty. In a mansard-roofed French Second Empire edifice, maiden aunts or dilettantes. In a much-gabled Queen Anne, a doctor, a dandy? Gas-lighted some of the houses, others stood dark. Ambling along, I saw no one except a pair of night-soil men making their rounds. While there might be water closets within the houses, there were still back garden privies that needed to be emptied, and this distasteful process had to be done by darkness. hence the men with the great metal container on a cart. After the rumble of its wheels had faded away, although its fetor, alas, had not, I saw and heard no other persons, except coming towards me the measured pacing of a constable on his beat. "Good evening, ducks," I piped as he approached me. "And many good evenings to yourself, dearie." He was Irish and cheery, twirling his baton, nodding in approval of my burlap sack. "Me nose was telling me afore 'em stinkers past that Mock's turtle soup I'm sorry, guys. Me nose was telling me afore them stinkers passed that it's mock turtle soup they're after having at number 44. They're after having. Thank you kindly. Off I scuttled, lighting my sorry little lantern, and sure enough, in back of number 44, I found the skull of the calf's head they had boiled. One can hypothesize about people by their midden heaps. For instance, perhaps members of this household had aspirations that exceeded their means, as turtle soup, the genuine item, was all the rage among the rich. Once behind the houses, with the calf's skull in my bag, and the constable's friendliness bolstering my nerve, I zigzagged from backyard to backyard, entering mostly through carriage drives. From each carriage house, a dog would bark in a perfunctory manner, to be shushed by the boy or groom sleeping in the loft overhead after he had taken a peep at me through his window. Thus admitted to the netherworld of the neighborhood, I started to sort out the inhabitants in my mind. Sometimes there were vegetable gardens tucked behind the carriage houses, where they could easily be enriched by manure and straw. Solid and sensible folk, these. Some houses seemed empty, perhaps waiting for an owner to return from abroad, but quite a few were occupied by families with children, as evidenced by hoops, brightly striped balls, clapping monkey pool toys, etc., left lying about. And someone had a seamstress living in, sewing the entire family new springtime outfits for in the midden heap I found threads and scraps of everything from serge to taffeta, all of which I bagged by the light of my lantern. But at the next house I saw, as I shuffled towards its back fence, I needed no lantern. For some reason these people kept gas jets flaring out of doors like a modern sort of flambeau. How wasteful and how odd. The gate to the carriage drive was padlocked, but through the iron rails of the fence and by the light of all those outdoor gas jets, I could see quite a pile of bones just past the corner of the carriage house. Once one begins collecting something, for whatever reason, the act becomes a sort of mania in itself. Even though at the night's end I would give away my finds to the first beggar I encountered, nevertheless when I saw those bones I had to have them. Forgetting that I was supposed to be a bent and rickety woman of the slums, I swarmed up and over the fence within a moment. I love to climb and seldom get the chance, as this is not a pastime much pursued by proper females. Light-hearted as well as light-footed, I jumped down inside the fence and turned towards my objective. But I had not gone 3 steps when a roar worthy of a Bengal tiger paralyzed me. A huge animal charged me, bearing down upon me like a galloping horse. Ye gods! I had not seen the doghouse tucked behind the carriage house, and now the proper owner of the bones, a massive mastiff, wished to tear my throat out. With no time to retreat over the fence, I was in a panic, fumbling for my dagger, when quite unexpectedly the beast halted, although it continued to roar and snarl at me in the most resounding and frightful manner. Whatever in the world? Why was I not being mauled? Then I saw. Oh my goodness. The mastiff had halted on the far side of another inner fence, but not the usual sort of fence, unless I was much mistaken. "What have you there, Lucifer?" drawled an insolent voice, and a massive man rather resembling his mastiff appeared from between beech trees and walked up the far side of the inner fence. The sunk fence, so-called, also known as a ha-ha. A deep ditch lined with stone. Such modern moats were not uncommon around country estates, hidden in the contours of the land so as to preserve the integrity of the vista whilst keeping out cattle and intruders. But here in the city, whatever for? "A midden picker," the burly man was saying with disgust, eyeing me as if I were a cockroach to be crushed. "How did you get in?" Making myself as small as possible, not difficult under the circumstances, I did not answer, only staring at the sunk fence with my mouth ajar. "You don't know what it is, do you, bones for brains?" I could hear the man sneer in his voice. "It's a ha-ha, and do you know why it's called that, dust scholar? It's called that because when you fall in, we come in and look at you, and we laugh. Ha-ha, ha-ha." Something in the tone of his voice frightened me even more than a mastiff's barking did. I began to back away. Ha-ha, ha-ha. I dodged into the shadows behind the carriage house, out of his view, and applied myself earnestly to climbing over the wrought iron fence. "Ha-ha! And then we go away," he shouted after me, "and leave you there until you rot." I was never in any danger, really, yet until I had got home again and lay safe in my bed, I could not stop trembling. It's the end of the 3rd chapter. Oh, thanks, Susan. My book is late. Have fun vacuuming. You probably can't hear me because the vacuum's too loud. Alright, guys, I think I'm going to read one more chapter and then call it, because I'm starting to... Well, this is a really short chapter, so maybe... Let's see how long the 5th chapter is. Okay, these next 2 chapters are kind of short, so I might read 2 more chapters and then call it. So, I like to do 1 through 5 as like a chunk, so... because I think this book has 17 as well. I think all the books have 17 chapters. It has 18. Alright, chapter the 4th. The next morning, reporting to the steep-gabled and fancifully ornamented Gothic house where Dr. Ragaston maintained his office, I carried quite a load of society papers in my arms. "Good morning, Miss Michelle," cried my irrepressible page boy, holding the door open for me. "If you say so, Jotty." Going indoors felt grim despite the May sunshine streaming through the chintz curtains. I felt still shadowed by last night's odd encounter, but it scarcely mattered compared to the problem of the peculiar pink fan. Just as my reading material burdened my arms, the mystery surrounding Lady Cecily burdened my mind. Why had she so cleverly slipped to me her paper toy, of which I could make nothing? Sighing, I sent Jotty for newspapers, rang for tea, then settled into my desk with the Grub Street periodicals to enrich my knowledge of society some more. Lord Globetrotter will address the ladies of inanity on the topic of his recent voyage down the Nile. The Honourable Miss Disapproval breaks her engagement to the Honourable Mr. Disappointment. To soften and beautify the hair, beat up the whites of 4 eggs to a froth, rub it into the roots, and leave it there. New for spring, the bias-cut, invisible-seamed wrap morning dress. I truly shall go mad. Color-themed entertaining, the latest rage. The yellow luncheon, the pink... Wait a moment. The pink tea, just now so fashionable, is an expensive way of entertaining, yet one might as well be dead as out of fashion, so here is how true pink tea should be done. The table linen should be pink. The dishes also of a delicate pink shade, which you may borrow for the occasion. Arrange white cakes on high cake stands lined with fancy pink paper, and pink frosted cakes on low cake stands lined with fancy white paper. The table should be illuminated with a chandelier of pink candles. Flowers for decoration must also be pink, and your maids should wear pink caps and pink aprons. Serve the creams and ices in novel designs made of pink paper, such as baskets, bandboxes, seashells, or wheelbarrows. These, along with the party favors in many more beautiful designs, may be procured at any fashionable caterer's. Paper party favors. Pink. Including, perhaps, cheap pink fans? A connection. A thread. A very thin thread indeed, but better than nothing. Sitting up quite straight, I rang the bell, and when, in Jotty's absence, the kitchen maid appeared, I asked her to convey to Mrs. Bailey and Mrs. Fitzsimmons my request that they might kindly favour me with their presence for a moment. I should explain that in Dr. Ragaston's Gothic establishment there was not merely an office to be looked after, but a house full of boarders to stabilize my finances, for all of which Mrs. Fitzsimmons served as housekeeper, Mrs. Bailey as cook. These 2 dowdy white-capped women appeared before me in the same doubtful expression, with the same doubtful expression on each dumpling-cheeked face. After months in Dr. Ragaston's employ without ever having seen the man, surely they suspected that I was something more than a mere secretary. After greeting them pleasantly enough, although I did not invite them to sit down, I asked, where might one find such a thing as a caterer? Mrs. Bailey puffed up like a ruffled hedgehog. What would you want a caterer for? I can do anything. But before the offended cook could further defend her territorial right to her kitchen, I silenced her. I simply asked, where are caterers to be found? In what area of London, I meant. Just as birds of a feather flock together, so did businesses in that city. Bankers on Threadneedle Street, tailors on Savile Row, sixpenny magazines on Grub Street, physicians on Harley, dead fish principally at Billingsgate Market. After an interval of discussion, Mrs. Fitzsimmons and Mrs. Bailey agreed that most of the caterers were to be found near Gillyglade Court, an offshoot of the fashionable shopping district around Regent Street. An hour or so later, a cab pulled up at a corner of the commercial Mecca, and quite a well-bred young lady descended, yours truly. In order to transform myself, I had made use of my secret dressing room, where I had removed rouge, cheek and nostril inserts, false eyelashes, hair additions, etc., but then crowned my own narrow, sallow, aristocratic face with the most gloriously coiffed wig, to which I attached a hat consisting mostly of a poof of feathers and lace. Next, touches of perfume and powder, then a perfectly divine promenade dress of celadon green, dotted Swiss with the very latest in puff sleeves. Also a dove-gray kid leather boots and gloves, a white organza parasol, and voila! Impeccably upper class, with my dagger as always sheathed in the bust of my corset, but now concealed by a handsome opal brooch. Regent Street and its environs can be summed up in 3 words: glass, gas, and brass. That is to say, oft-cleaned bow windows, replete with finery, illuminated by numerous lamps in the most resplendent of all possible surroundings. On this fine day, polished doorknobs and the like appeared even more shining than usual, because less sooty. With silk petticoats rustling beneath my trailing skirt, I perambulated in and out of the glittering shops, twirling my parasol and smiling amiably and condescendingly upon clerks bobbing behind the counters. After a brief while, my seemingly aimless peregrinations carried me into Gillyglade Court. At each door I entered, my posh clothing plus my aristocratic accent drew instant servility from clerks. I quickly located several caterers and learned more than I wanted to know about their services. I could have rented burnished silver Persian coffee urns, pressed glass plates, potted ferns, shadowy epergnes, sublimely useless, for the center of each table, or golden bird cages, complete with nightingales to hang from the ceiling. I was offered 7-course menus, wine lists, and a selection of refections, including but certainly not limited to bonbons with humorous mottos folded into them upon slips of paper. Indeed, these caterers could do almost anything with paper. I have heard that a pink-themed tea is quite the thing for spring, I said at each of 5 establishments, gazing vaguely around me through my lorgnette. At each the response was much the same. Oh, yes, yes indeed. And I would be shown a plethora of pink grimcracks, pink doilies, pink daisies, pink paper sailboat candy holders, pink paper rose petal bowls, pink paper squirrels, top hats, mushrooms, camels, pyramids, all of which I would regard with slight but evident revulsion as I said doubtfully, I don't know, something a bit more elegant. Have you any fans? No, alas, they did not. But at the 6th caterer's shop they did. Oh, yes. We made them up something special for the Viscountess of Inglethorpe, and they were a great success, so we made some more to keep on hand. Just a moment, I will fetch one to show you. And out came the pink paper fan, seemingly identical in every detail to the one the girl in the bell skirt had slipped me. Let me see that, I demanded, retaining my imperial manner, but quite forgetting my poise of indifference as I grabbed the pink paper fan and held it up to the light, peering at it, nay, glaring at it through my lorgnette, for something was wrong. Different. Is this the same paper you used for the Viscountess of Inglethorpe? Yes, exactly the same. Good quality heavy pink paper, but plain. No watermark of any kind. I stood there a moment, and I am sure the hapless clerk must have wondered why I scowled so. May I take this with me? I dare say I sounded angry, although my exasperation was all for myself. Of course. Thank you. Ungraciously I stormed out, muttering to myself as I strode towards the nearest cab stand. Blind. I have been blind. How could I have overlooked a device so simple and obvious? I had been dense, obtuse, stupid. But knowing what I did now, with my finger upon the right clue at last, I felt sure that I would soon learn the nature of Lady Cecily's difficulty. That's the end of the 4th chapter. I'm going to go ahead and just press on through the 5th. Chapter the 5th. Miss Michelle returned to her lodging much earlier than usual that day, attempting and failing to give a smiling greeting to the startled Mrs. Tupper and her equally startled girl of all work. Blessedly, the deafness of the former and the humble status of the latter rendered any explanation unnecessary. I simply nodded, waved, and strode upstairs. The moment I had closed and locked the door of my room behind me, I pounced upon the peculiar pink fan Lady Cecily had slipped to me. Holding it up to the window, I studied once more the faint markings upon the pink paper. Markings I had taken for a sort of checkered decorative motif, a watermark. And I confess I said something quite naughty, for I should have guessed the first moment I saw them. But vexation would get me nowhere. Mentally setting emotion aside, I struck a match with which I lit a sconce of candles. Then, taking my pink mystery in hand once more, I opened it until it formed a nearly flat half circle, and began gently to warm it at the flames, careful not to scorch the paper. Gingerly moving it about to heat all portions of it equally and slowly, I watched brown lines beginning to emerge from the background of pink. Yes, invisible writing. I noted with approval that Lady Cecily, with the instinct of a true artist, must have used a tiny brush rather than a pen to leave no impressions upon the paper itself after her invisible ink, most likely lemon juice, had dried. My heartbeat hastened, for the secret message written on the fan was almost ready to be read. Rather, deciphered. When I felt sure the fan's pink paper had yielded all the brown lines it was likely to show me, I hurried to sit down with my writing desk in my lap, snatched up some foolscap paper, and began to copy the missive in pencil in case the original might fade. Even now it was difficult to see clearly. With some guesswork I transcribed it thus. Several weeks earlier, during a period of inactivity and, I must confess, loneliness, I had obtained and read a publication upon the subject of secret writings and ciphers. Not something I would normally pick up, but this particular trifling monograph, his own words, had been authored by Sherlock Holmes, my brother, and I had read it and reread it just to hear his precise and coolly passionate voice. Thanks to Sherlock, then, I knew that what I saw before me was called the Mason cipher, having been invented by Freemasons in the past century, but I could easily have solved it even before having read my brother's excellent text, for this secret code was not so secret, being commonly used among school children everywhere. Indeed, it could be decoded so simply I wondered why Lady Cecily had bothered to use a cipher at all. At the top of my paper I scrawled the key. Sorry, I feel like it's not focusing. To encipher from this, one drew the shape of each letter's container, so to speak, absurdly simple. Deciphering it was just as easy. Referring back to the secret message, I quickly translated thus. That was all. Curses, I grumbled, glaring at the less than satisfactory message before me. The only words that made any sense were clock, and at the end, unless, misspelled. Unless? Unless what? The word suggested altercation. Do such and so unless you want a thrashing, or won't do such and so unless... Unless what? A sentence ought not to end with unless. Unless the word were not misspelled, but incomplete. The message had been interrupted, suggesting duress. I felt in my bones that I had hit upon the truth. Lady Cecily had been unable to finish her message. Evidently she was closely watched. I wished I could have simply written in plain English. She had simply written in plain English, for she could have managed that more quickly. But then I realized why she had not done so. Invisible ink, although it dries clear, is not actually impossible to see. It leaves a sheen noticeable in certain lights. Handwriting might have been detected, but since the straight-line cipher had concealed itself nicely along the folds of the fan, looking like a sort of decoration while being simple for a recipient to solve. Clever. And desperate. A cipher secretly written in invisible ink on a paper fan of all things, then slipped to someone she met by accident, someone she barely knew. Certainly such a cipher ought to be a plea for assistance, for rescue, for help. Of course, the first 4 letters were not H-E-L-C, they were H-E-L-P. The cipher for P looked just like the cipher for C, except that included a dot, which evidently I had not perceived. What of clock, then? Eureka! The next word had to be locked. Feverishly addressing my pencil to the cipher again, mindful of missing dots, I eventually arrived at the following. Deciphered. Help. Locked in room. Starved. Unless. Or in plainer English, help, I am being locked in my room and starved unless. I must admit that my first reaction upon reading this was one of immense gratification. I felt all of the thrill of the chase and of elucidation. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me show you this. That's what it looks like. I must admit that my first reaction upon reading this was one of immense gratification. I felt all of the thrill of the chase and of elucidation. Eureka! I understood why Lady Cecily had worn such a silly thing as a bell skirt. She had been forced to do so, in order to hobble her so she could not possibly run away from her dragon as chaperones. Now with her errands completed she was presumably locked away again. But where? Here was a case of a missing person indeed. I anticipated search, adventure, perhaps even a rescue. But immediately my fervor turned to horror for Cecily's sake. Could I find her in time? Could I find her before... What? She was being locked up and starved unless what? Unless she yielded to some demand, obviously. Unless she obeyed some command she had so far defied. Unless she agreed to... Oh no, I whispered as I remembered. Oh, how awful. Could it be? A trousseau you will need, and a trousseau you shall have, one of the guardian dowagers had said. I had no very clear idea what a trousseau looked like, or what might be included in one. To the best of my knowledge, it consisted of expensive, lacy unmentionables, but I knew what a trousseau was for. They had brought her to London to shop for a trousseau. This meant there was none prepared already. There had been no period of engagement during which ribbons and ruffles might lovingly be stitched, and there was no time to order a supremely fashionable one from abroad. In my horror, I leapt to my feet, spilling paper, pencil, and writing dust to the floor. Lady Cecily was going to be married. Soon, and against her will. That's the end of chapter 5. Oh, sorry, bye Susan, sorry I missed you. Alrighty guys, that's the end of the 5th chapter, so it's roughly, well, it's a little less than halfway through. I think I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. I'm getting kind of tired. It's not even 9 o'clock yet, but thank you guys for watching. Thanks for being here. So I've got a long week ahead of me, so I'm not going to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed if I don't get to bed soon. But thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks for watching. I'm enjoying. I think this one is one of my favorite books, if I remember correctly. But it's a good one. So thank you for being here. I have no idea when I will read the next section of this book. But hopefully it will be relatively soon. Tuesday nights tend to work really well for me. So maybe next Tuesday I'll be able to... Actually, I think next Tuesday will work really well for me. So if you have the time, Tuesday nights might end up being my day to kind of get through this book, just like one little chip at a time. So anyways, I will see you guys soon. I'll see you tomorrow at Wind Waker Wednesday for sure. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you have a good night. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.